everybody. Welcome back to the GovConHacks podcast. We do have a surprise guest joining us, Sarah Sinati. Sarah, as you might know, is a proposal manager. So we thought for this episode especially, it would be great to have both perspectives. Welcome,
Thank you
Sarah.
for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us, especially on such short notice. So as far as industry updates, we're still waiting on the certification programs to reopen. So we'll certainly keep you guys apprised when that happens. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dig in. So I thought this topic was important because I'm seeing a lot of cases where contractors are at the 11th hour, sometimes even post-award, having this big oh shit moment, I'll call it, because they didn't realize that something was in the contract, they're not able to comply, or for whatever factor, it sucks to really have to turn down a contract. So I wanted to talk about your go, no-go analysis. How do you qualify opportunities and detect these things before you submit your offer? Another instance would be, and Sarah, I'm sure you probably have seen some from the back end, and I encourage you to chime in too. But another instance is going to be, you bid, let's say a construction contract. You bid on the construction contract. You find out after the award that you are unable to get the bond. You only have 5 days to kind of pull out of that contract based on the FAR. So, you could put yourself in a real hole if you're not preemptively being proactive, I should say, and identifying these qualifying factors. And a little bit before the episode, Sarah was asking me, how do you even, what even is capture, right? And qualifying your opportunities is part of the capture phase. So tell me, Sarah, when you typically, in your experience, have gotten the proposal, what has already happened? You are the writer, you're managing the proposal. What do you assume has already been done at this point?
Well, it's very funny that you asked because I can remember only one or two proposals in my life where someone has actually done any capture on them before handing it to me. So unfortunately, like you're saying right now, capture does not get done. And when it sometimes gets done, it doesn't get done correctly. I've had that happen with the bond where we didn't have the bond, so we couldn't submit the proposal. Other things there are things to me that I feel like are so easy. If they're saying you need CMMI certification and you don't, or ISO, and you don't have it, it should be either a no bid or do we know of a teaming partner that we can get together with?
Yes.
I feel like those are obvi.
Those are your final options at that point. I agree. And in a little bit, we're going to go through SAM.gov opportunity, just a quick example. And I'm just going to walk you through my process and what I look for when I'm qualifying my opportunity. So I'm one, as a small business, my BD and capture role are pretty much one and the same. Whereas, Sarah, having worked for a bigger company than mine, those roles were separated. So we're going to assume for this particular episode that BD and capture is one, because they're often used interchangeably in this market. And in smaller companies, it's very common that you have, one team doing both of those things and then handing it off to the proposal team. So when you're qualifying an opportunity, there's a few things that you need to take into consideration. And this is so that you don't end up exhausting and misallocating your resources. Most of our audience are small businesses, right? So I'm going to assume that those of you who are joining us are small. And you don't necessarily have, I'm sending myself and one other team member, we're going to 8A. We dropped $1,150 on the tickets. That's the early bird price. We got hotel, we got airfare. This is an investment, right? You want to make sure that each of those investments produces an ROI. Otherwise, why are you doing it? So using that time wisely. And part of what you're going to be doing at that conference is your capture, your business development. You are going to be having conversation with agencies. You are going to be asking questions about what might be coming down the pike, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up of what might be coming down the pike is because forecasts are a great way to extend that timeline. The timeline is the first kicker that I see so often, and it's really prominent here in Q4, right? Because we're seeing a high number of solicitations. I mean, SAM.gov is just pew, pew, pew. And we're trying to catch up. There's a turnaround time of a week, maybe 2 weeks if we're lucky. And you have to be selective, right? You can't bid on them all. And if you do, you're certainly not going to win them all, if any, because your resources are spread thin. So how do we make sure that we increase that P-win rate? By using a thorough go, no-go analysis. I sat in a capture meeting earlier. This is an interesting story, Sarah. I sat in a capture meeting earlier, and the team had brought up like 6 opportunities. And this was probably the 5th one by now that we've had with, the person heading up this area. And 4 out of the 6 opportunities, I was like, this isn't even in our swim lane. Like, we're trying to put butts in seats. You're sending us consultant stuff, right? So it's just out of scope. So scope is going to be your second one. Can you turn it around in time with quality? And then your scope of work, right? If you don't have the time to do it and do it right, don't do it at all. Just no-go it. Get it off your plate. And I'm going to show you guys a visual too. I mentioned forecasts. So how do we use these forecasts to our advantage? We're so used to like being on SAM. We are qualifying opportunities or, just looking at a scope of work, but we're not taking any other factors into consideration. If you are, looking at a solicitation, performing your go, no-go analysis, you need to be looking at 3 primary sections: your scope of work, section L, and section M, otherwise known as your evaluation criteria and instructions to offer. Is not necessarily in that order. But those are the 3 sections you're looking for. Evaluation criteria is very important because if there are, let's say, experience is one, matching the scope of work. Let's say your technical approach is another one, a third factor, arbitrary, whichever one you want. If I know that I'm going to be weak in the past performance, but I'm going to nail my technical approach, I might still bid. Looking forward to see, is this even worth it? What's that?
I agree with what you're saying. And I think also you can start to look at, if you're weak in past performance, do you get a partner that's strong in past performance? Right. And then, of course, you're thinking about trade-off in terms of like, well, how many people is this person going to want to fill? And then is that going to take away so much profit that it's not worth it to me anymore? So right. It's a constant balancing act.
It is a balancing act. And oftentimes, if you're one who are bidding on, these long-term IDIQs, you're definitely kind of doing that financial analysis as part of your go, no-go. And this isn't, for the one-off landscaping and janitorial contracts. We're talking about, your IT solution providers and those that are doing some of the larger consulting contracts, service contracts. So that's also important to note. And let me just ask you guys real quick, since we're on the subject, because there are so many variances and directions I could go in here with the scenarios that I'm using. So if you guys could let us know if you're watching, what industry are you in? What is your space? That way we can kind of tailor our approach to allow it to resonate with you if you're joining us live. Another huge benefit of joining live, guys, you get the tailored information. So let me show you. I'm going to backtrack one moment. And let's say, I want to plan ahead because long-term planning is incredibly important if you're working in the public sector. I'm not looking at just what's on SAM now. I'm looking on what's coming up next quarter, what's proposed in the budget, what's coming up second quarter of 25, third quarter, and so on, right? Because I need to keep the revenue stream steady.
And so where are you finding this stuff?
I am finding this stuff on forecasts. So let me go ahead.
That's literally what it's called?
Well, aquisition.gov.
Oh.
So I search for, and it's common knowledge that aquisition.gov is not updated very often, right? So all the agencies' forecasts do live on aquisition.gov, but because they're so inconsistent with the format and the frequency of updating them, some of the links are broken. So if you can't find what you're looking for, I just go to Google, Department of Defense acquisition forecast. And this is one that I took from a spreadsheet. I just uploaded it into a Monday board because this is just easier for me to visualize. Whether you use a spreadsheet, it doesn't matter how you do it as long as effectively you're doing it. And I like to sort of process of elimination in this format. So I'm able to filter really easily by fiscal year for my planning purposes. And what I'm just trying to do at this stage is, either add it to my pipeline or say I'm not interested. So I'm going to filter by NAICS, and I see one already that I want to add to my pipeline. And remember, this is stuff that hasn't hit SAM yet. So if you want and need more time in your planning to develop your proposals, get in front of it a little further by having those conversations with the government. You're not going to see everything on here. They do have a couple of simplified acquisitions, but I know right away if that dollar amount is under 250,000, that I'm not going to be bidding against the other than small businesses. Those simplified acquisitions are set aside for smalls. So I'm going to effectively prioritize those higher in my go, no go analysis than I am something, 7.5 million. I'm a little too small to handle a $7.5 million contract on my own. So if I want to target this contract, I want to start planning now and vetting some partners and bringing those partners in. Now, how am I going to know which partners I'm going to need for that, right? Because it's not just the size of the contract. Maybe there are some specific requirements that the government's going to need to provide this. What can I do to find that? I can look up, is this a new contract or is this a recompete? If it's a recompete, I can look at the old solicitation. If it's not a recompete and it's a brand new requirement, I'm just going to reach out to the point of contact on the solicitation, and I'm going to collect the intel that I can about the requirements so that I can start to shape, what partner am I looking for? Do I already have someone in my arsenal, or is this a new relationship I'm going to have to develop? What's my timeline on it? So if I can get and nail Lawrence down for any additional information that will help me form that go, no go analysis, that's precisely what I'm going to do. It's still early in the acquisition cycle. So I have a little time. What's that?
And how do you do that in terms of shaping and in terms of talking to the government? How is that happening?
Well, here's the thing, and we think of the government as this one big entity, but behind every one of those wooden desks is a human just like you and me. I shoot them an email and I ask. If I don't get a response, I pick up the phone and I call. Now, you'll very rarely find phone numbers on an acquisition forecast, but I do find, and it's usually the contracting officer that's listed on the forecast. I do find that when I'm citing a specific opportunity that, is on their forefront, probably something that they're in the process of planning or shaping, they're very apt to answer my questions. They're supposed to be anyway.
Mm-hmm.
In the instance, now some are more helpful than others. And sometimes you might face a situation where Lawrence has moved on and someone else is now in that place and the acquisition forecast hasn't been updated. That happens. In that case, just ask who's overseeing that acquisition now, and they'll direct you to the right person. So I've found, don't be scared to approach the government and ask.
I'm a little scared. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, it just
you and everyone else, right? Until you've done it a few times and you realize, they have to get these needs met too. So
I think my fear is I don't know what I'm allowed to ask, and I'm sure even if I ask something I'm not allowed to ask, they just won't answer it. But it's that kind of line that makes me nervous.
And I do take a lot of time and kind of plan what I'm going to ask. I try to find, if it's a recompete, I try to find the old solicitation before, I ask the questions, because if I can demonstrate that I've done my market research in some way, shape, or form, I get much better responses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to reach out to someone on the acquisition forecast and say, here's my capability statement. We're a woman-owned small business and HubZone, SBS. No, I'm not going to do all that. I'm going to be very direct, short, and to the point, because I know these people are busy. Let me go ahead and switch to an example, and we're just going to kind of go through this example. So I'm going to walk you guys through what I do, as I'm performing my own go, no-go analysis for my own business. Pretending that this is the type of work that I do, I'm just going to walk you through my thought process. And this is part of either BD or capture, depending on how big your organization is and how many resources you have. But it's part of identifying the opportunity, right? And there's many of you right now that probably are doing it all. You might even be writing the proposals. So if that is you, this is even more important, because what's the point in spending 80 hours if you miss something little in the beginning? That was wasted time that you could have used and applied to an opportunity that you had a better chance of winning. So it's just really about working smarter, not harder. That's why I'm taking the time to go through this. The first thing that I usually like to note here is these first characters of your solicitation number, guys, are always going to be your office code. If you're ever trying to figure out which procurement office is buying your stuff, it's right there in the notice ID of the opportunity that you're looking at. It's Naval Air Warfare Center. I don't know anybody in that particular procurement office, but I'm not necessarily going to let that deter me just yet, because I can always make friends, right? It was just posted today. I have an entire month to respond. It is anticipated to be awarded after Q4. And it is 8 days set aside. Here's where, for me, play stops. Do I have a partner who is 8A? And the prime has to be the 8A, right? So now my role has just shifted from prime to sub. Notice I didn't say no-go just yet, because I have 8A partners. Now I'm going to be more concerned with, together with said partners, are we going to meet the rest of the requirements? If you ever see the view changes button, you always want to select the view changes to see what updates have been made. And then we want to download the attachments effectively. First thing we're going to look at is the scope of work. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole scope of work of this solicitation because I already did and I know I can't do it. However, in comparing to something that you might be looking at in your various industries out there, that's essentially going to be your first line of defense, is the scope. Because if you can't perform the work, don't go any further. Don't waste any more of your time. The next thing I'm going to be looking at is the evaluation criteria. And let me just see if I can find. So here are the attachments. So here's the attachments list when I clicked on that first one. And I'm just going to download this because this is, the scope and probably where I'm going to find the instructions to offers and the evaluation criteria. All right. Now this is all, keep in mind, guys, this is all before Sarah ever sees it. She's the proposal writer. This is all done in the front. All this work is front end work before we even put pen to paper. So
well, it should be anyway.
It should be. That's right. There's a couple of different ways and there's a couple of different techniques that I have learned from some of the industry gurus that preceded me to quickly get through this. One of those ways is the trusty old Control F, right? For shall, must, and will. So shall was mentioned 199 times in this document. So that would be one way. Another way would be, and if you do shall, you should also do must and will. I want to find evaluation criteria. Now we're getting into some of the requirements, even though this isn't actually evaluation criteria. I just wanted to point this out because this was an example, a similar example to something that a client had to no-go an opportunity on earlier today. Was the subject matter expert that the government was seeking needed to have very, very specific credentials, and one of which was a credential for that specific state and the place of performance.
I always think, now this is not always the case, but it always pops into my head when I see something super specific in a proposal that it's wired, because it's their way of sort of saying, like, we want our incumbent, we know they have this weird thing, so we're going to make it a requirement so that it automatically eliminates other competition. So
it reduces the competition. You're right. And that's what I mean when I talk about influencing the acquisition, because an incumbent is only one case, only a certain percentage of the time. And the other percentage of the time, what if it's a new contractor and we like their solution better, right? I'm going to put more of their differentiators in the requirement if I don't want to work with that company anymore.
Right.
So yeah, that does go both ways. Either way, someone has influenced that acquisition. That's a very good point. And if you're doing a solid go, no-go analysis or qualification on an opportunity, you will over time be able to tell in your industry when Sarah said wired, or when it was written for someone, or when there was influence that reduced competition. So it is one way that the government has found to save time in the acquisition process. A lot of times the program managers are dictating, they have the ability to say who or what when these circumstances are right. If the program manager or the end user likes your solution, they have a lot of influence over the acquisition of your product or service. So keep that in mind. HUD zone price preference. I still haven't found the evaluation criteria yet. Here we are, section L, proposal instructions, section M, evaluation criteria. We're getting closer. And this is definitely a DoD solicitation. They're not all this.
So when you are talking to the CO and you are, you've seen something in the forecast and you're interested and you're talking to them, what are some ways that you can shape it for yourself?
Typically, the way that I've experienced, and again, this might vary based on industry. So my disclaimer here is results might vary. It doesn't always go this way, but in my experience, especially in IT, I'll reach out to the contracting officer about something on the acquisition. They'll answer my questions, and I'll essentially ask for a capability briefing with the end users. So essentially, who I want to be in that room is going to be the end user and the decision maker. And I want to be able to use that presentation time to sell them, because the only thing that has to happen for the contracting process to begin is a need has to be determined. So whether they already know they need it, or whether you convince them they need it, even if it wasn't something on the forecast. I've sold software to government for companies, that they weren't planning on buying just because they liked it. So they liked the presentation, they liked the value that I demonstrated, and they were able to buy it through that presentation being what determined the need. So it can happen a couple of different ways, but it really kind of depends on what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to qualify the opportunity, I'm probably going to gear my questions toward my go, no-go factors, right? For example, let's use that bonding. I'm in construction. I see the dollar amount of the project. I'm hesitant. I don't know if I can get that bonding in time. I might ask the contracting officer if, they are planning on breaking that up, if it's going to be competed, by IDIQ. If it's going to be an IDIQ, that bond, that whole dollar amount might be reduced. So it depends on what information is publicly available to me. But if they haven't determined the method of competition yet, that's going to be one of the first things I want to find out. And if I have a federal supply schedule, for example, I want to make it known to them right now before it even gets to SAM that I have a federal supply schedule and that this product is available on that schedule. So instead of competing it on SAM, they might save themselves some time and energy and just go straight to eBuy. So that's what we mean by influence and capture and BD. And again, those are interchangeably. Usually your BD team is who you send boots on the ground to the conferences. They're the bubbly personalities. They have all the relationships. And your capture people are the nerds like me that dig into the data and find the answers and collect the qualitative intel. So that's kind of a simple, easy way to break it up, though they're used pretty interchangeably.
One more question. For something like an industry day, are you just going to an industry day just to learn, or is there anything else involved in an industry day?
Me, I use them very strategically.
Okay.
And we, I believe, did a episode. If not, it's on the calendar in planning phases, how to, prepare for these conferences. And one of the things I talked about is if it's an industry day with an agency that I'm targeting, I'm not only going in to learn what they have to say, but I'm going in to see who else is in the room. I'm dropping my elevator pitch and my contact information into the chat. And I don't care if, I'm going to find during that presentation time a question, a gap, something so that I can speak at the end, right? I'm going to come off mute. I'm going to introduce myself, my company, and I'm going to ask my question. Whatever question, doesn't have to be anything. And I was actually told by a contracting officer some years ago, every opportunity you have to speak to the government is an opportunity to present your value. So use it. And I have been doing that ritualistically ever since. And relationships has been where most of my business comes from. I prefer to subcontract rather than prime personally. A lot of people know that about me already. And primarily that's because of the lack of resources in the proposal department. My proposals, as you now know, Sarah, they take quite a long time. So I'm very selective on what we go after as prime. And that's one of the reasons. And here's the last thing that I want to point out, because we did talk about evaluation criteria being one of the factors that you want to consider in your go, no-go analysis. Sources of past performance evaluation information must include information provided by the offer in response to the solicitation, obtained from questionnaires and other sources available. So they're often, and DoD is infamous for doing things like offer must have at least 5 years of past performance in a similar scope of work with at least 3 different federal agencies. Guys, they're not all like that, right? So when we're looking at something DoD, that tends to be a huge barrier to entry for a lot of smaller businesses. That and the cybersecurity requirement. So I'm not cyber compliant yet. So I just avoid DoD. Why am I going to go after bidding on a DoD contract when I know that NIST 800-171 is in there and I'm not in compliance with it? Here's another example of a epic qualification fail. Transportation company wins a contract, a multi-year IDIQ contract with DLA. She was asked for something. I can't remember what prompted her to reach out. So I look at the solicitation or the contract award, and I'm, looking at her company, and she's only been in business for like 6 or 7 months.
Oh my God.
And I said, you're an asset-based trucking company? No. You're a broker? Yeah, she's a broker. I said, are you compliant with NIST 800-171? Because it was in there, clear as day. I mean, a huge write-up. And she said, what's that?
Oh my God.
And I said, did you read this solicitation in its entirety before you placed your offer? And she said, I skimmed it.
Oh my God. Hold on. But how did she end up winning? I mean, don't they?
Lowest price technically acceptable. So the government
is not technically acceptable. I mean, don't they go through and do their, like, you must have this, you must have this? Like, I'm in shock.
The government assumes that when you submit an offer, and this is why one of the reasons your qualification is so important, because if you're not checking who's gonna, and it'll come out in the wash, right? The government assumes that when you submit an offer to them, that you are in compliance. So, SAM, your reps and certs will suffice in most cases as Section K of the solicitation, to where you can print that out. Unless there's any variance, then you have to answer it manually. But
I'm just in shock that somewhere in their proposal, they didn't say, and we are NIST, whatever, which I get what you're saying. She didn't read it to say that, but then I would think that the evaluators would go through the proposal and say, the NIST was a requirement. You didn't say you had it, so we're tossing you.
Well, it was in the clauses, but it wasn't something that had to be, it wasn't a checkbox that you had to check yes or no to.
I know, but I always say, like, whenever they say, like, you need to have ISO or CMMI, they don't ask for the certificates except for when it's like a really huge GWAC, like Oasis or Soup or something like that. But usually when it's just, a task order or whatever, they just say, like, you need to be CMMI certified. And that's it. They don't say and prove it to us. But I'll say, like, in my introduction, and I'll say throughout the proposal, we're ISO compliant, because I'm like, I got to make sure I'm checking every single box they're looking for. Like, I'm just baffled that the evaluator didn't catch.
It could have been a new contracting officer.
Sure.
She's
I mean, we all
submitting
make mistakes. I get that.
I'm to assume that it's compliant. The price was acceptable. I need X number of companies on this IDIQ. She checked the boxes. And again, it just could that, had she not caught it within those 5 days and she were, performing the work, that could have been incredibly detrimental. So luckily we were within the 5-day window, and she did decline the contract. And, bullet dodged, right? We dodged that bullet. But now, we're working on the cyber compliance, and we're working, there are resources out here to help you fill these gaps. Mm-hmm. So there really isn't any reason to have to bid on something that you're not quite ready for.
Right.
And destroy any long-term chances that you have of getting additional business with that agency, or a negative CPARS review. You're done for. I mean, they say that, you're not always done for, but let's face it, if you guys are going to buy something and you go and look up the company you're doing business with on Google and they have a 1-star review, are you going to look for someone else to do the work? Probably.
Yeah, it just makes the climb, more difficult.
Yeah, it makes your job a whole lot harder, definitely. But we are a little bit over time. Do you have any last fun thoughts that you want to add, or any other
No,
questions?
I don't. This was so fun. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I figure, along the way, when we have capture episodes, we're going to invite Sarah along if she wants to ask questions. I see you guys are awfully quiet tonight. So thank you, Sarah, so much for giving me some questions to answer. Be sure to subscribe and tap the bell for notifications of our lives. We will see you back here, same time next week. Bye, everybody.